Hey everyone, I'm Ian, and this handheld is half the size of my house. It makes me feel inadequate.
The Sega Game Gear is definitely a console that exists alright, serving as Sega's answer to the Game Boy and the Atari Lynx, but I bet you forgot about that, didn't ya? Boasting a color screen and generally much better specs than the Game Boy, the Game Gear is truly a sight to behold. Not this one though. Mine's broken. Battery compartment's all corroded and the screen is messed up. It should make for a fun fixer-upper project sometime, but I'm getting off topic here.
Being a Sega system of the early to mid-90s, you bet your ass this thing was flooded with Sonic games, and you know what? They were mostly pretty good.
There are a lot of Sonic games for this thing. Most of them are available on the Master System as well, at least in other countries where that system was a lot more popular. Games like Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic Chaos are solid platformers that have solid conversions to the Game Gear, other than some pretty serious screen crunch, while a few of the ones developed specifically for the Game Gear, like Sonic Triple Trouble and Tails Adventure, are really fun games as well. Then there's these.
Yeah, the Game Gear is home to some of the most infamous games in the Sonic franchise, although infamous does not always directly equate to being actually bad. So I figured we'd give a few of these games a try, see if we find any hidden gems. A diamond in the rough, as it were. Now let's start with the most infamous of these games and work our way down to the more obscure, starting off with Sonic Drift.
Well, in this case, Sonic Drift 2, since the first one was never released stateside on the Game Gear, and I didn't feel like importing it. They're pretty similar though, and rather infamous within the fanbase for raising a very deep philosophical question that may well shake you to your very core. If Sonic's fast, why he in a car? To which I say, shut up, that's stupid, it's a car race, dumbass. And honestly, for the first game in a video titled Bad Game Gear Sonic Games, we're not really starting off with a bad game. Sonic Drift 2 is perfectly fine. It's primitive, to be sure, but trying to make a Mario Kart clone on an 8-bit handheld is sure to present a challenge, and they pull it off about as well as you'd expect. The graphics are nice, the music is fine, there's a lot of characters. Yeah, this is decent. There's a shocking amount of variety in the course design, with some being basic 3-lap tracks and some being more of a linear A to B path you have to follow, which is something different from other kart racers of the time. The tracks are also very distinct from each other, and it's definitely clear what environment you're supposed to be racing in. The cast of characters is diverse, and each has different special abilities used like items, costing rings found around the track, which honestly leads to a little more variety than I would have expected out of something like this. Also, it calls Robotnik Eggman, even though this is an American copy, and as far as I know, that is a first for the series. Although, New Souls isn't quite right. The first Drift game had a lot less content and lacks variety, so it's definitely not very good, but Drift 2 could definitely be a lot worse. I wouldn't call it a good game exactly, but if you want a pretty basic fun kart racer akin to an arcade game like Pole Position, but with that good old Sonic coat of paint, this will do the job just fine.
Now, unquestionably, the most hated Sonic game on the Game Gear is Sonic Labyrinth, and if you go into this one expecting the very worst, you might be disappointed.
Don't get me wrong, Sonic Labyrinth is pretty fucking bad. It's clunky and awkward and boring as shit. It's got a lot in common with Sonic 3D Blast, not just in terms of perspective, but also basic level structure. Basically, each stage is a maze, and scattered around within are 3 keys that open up the door at the end. Find the keys, exit the level, rinse and repeat for about half an hour. It's a tedious structure, but that isn't really what drags the game down and leaves it oh so notorious. Nah, that's all down to the control. It's bad. This game's story is that Eggman snuck into Sonic's house while he was asleep and swapped out his shoes for these heavy ones that make him run slow.
So why didn't Eggman just fucking kill him while he slept or something if he was in his house? Well, whatever, Sonic is slow now, for plot reasons, and yeah, it sucks.
Not just that Sonic is slow. Mind you, given the style of gameplay here, I don't really have an issue with that. It's just how slow he is. It's legitimately agonizing, and general movement is so stiff and sluggish, and honestly, just kind of uncomfortable. You can move quickly though, since the spin dash is here, and it's really quick, but it makes Sonic rocket around like a pinball, and it's basically uncontrollable. You can uncurl from it, but then you skid in a straight line for a while, and you're more vulnerable to enemies. Honestly, this sort of works for me. It's a risk versus reward system, and I almost always enjoy that sort of setup. What I don't enjoy is actually playing this game. It's boring. So boring. And that's entirely down to the level design, which, though I'm sure it's the best they could do for the hardware, is just tedious as hell. Even though the game is only around half an hour long, it felt like I'd spent days recording this footage, which is especially weird since it's incredibly easy. In fact, it's one of the easiest games in the entire franchise, especially these boss fights. They're a joke. That being said though, it isn't really as bad as people make it out to be. Spin dashing around is satisfying, and the game at least looks and sounds great, although getting a power-up makes the entire screen flash, and it's liable to cause seizures in certain players and eye strain on the rest of us, so, not too big on that. It's not a good game by any means, but it's certainly not one of the series' worst efforts.
Well then what is one of the series' worst efforts? Well, look at it like this. If Sonic Labyrinth represents the gameplay half of Sonic 3D Blast, well, what about the pre-rendered goodness of that game's presentation? Well, fuck you for asking. Sonic Blast. It sucks.
I don't have any kind words or defense for this. Sonic Blast is just kind of the worst. I mean, look at it. Gross. Well, this is the only traditional 2D Sonic game in this video, which means I actually have something to compare it against. Now, like I said earlier, the Game Gear was home to some really solid Sonic games, both ports of Master System games and original titles, like Sonic Triple Trouble, which is a great little platformer. This takes the foundation set up by its predecessors and says, "Nah fam, I'm good." Literally every element of this game feels like a bootleg. It starts off in Green Hill, which is just hilariously lazy, especially since this was before Green Hill would show up in every single game. It progresses from there through 5 zones, each fitting a standard basic Sonic trope, and each managing to somehow both be incredibly annoying to play and incredibly easy and short. It is a 2D Sonic game, which means there are special stages too, accessed through hidden giant rings a la Sonic 3. They disgust me. Like, seriously, who looked at this and thought, yeah, that'll show those Nintendo fans who's boss? Well, they're easy at least, probably the easiest special stages I've ever played actually. Although they look like blue spheres, they play a lot closer to the Sonic 3 half-pipe, except it's a straight line so you can always see the rings coming. I'd be shocked if anyone ever managed to fail one of these, honestly. Also, the giant ring is like barely bigger than a normal ring, and that just kind of frustrates me for some reason. Honestly, everything here frustrates me for some reason. Not only is this game ugly, it's just really fucking lame. The whole thing is clearly designed around Knuckles, who is also playable and controls how you'd expect, other than his glide being really fucking heavy, but I went with Sonic instead. How'd they compensate for this design choice? Well, they gave him a double jump, so you can just skip most of everything. That's really pathetic, but whatever. At least it makes the game go by quicker. And yeah, quick it is. Sonic Blast is short and easy, with most levels taking around a minute to complete. I say most because sometimes later on things get a little bit funky. This water level? Fuck it, I hate this stage passionately. It's super short and easy, yeah, but there are these currents that carry you around, and unless you know exactly where to jump to avoid them, you'll be getting blown backwards constantly. Add to that the fact that Sonic's hitbox is all kinds of janky, so you can't really predict if you're gonna hit them or not, and this just kind of drains me. It isn't even really frustrating, it's just straight up exhausting. The entire game is like this, actually. I think that's mostly due to the controls. Sonic is a legitimate struggle to handle in this game. People can bash Sonic 4 all they want, but this is hands down the worst control in any 2D Sonic game. The physics are straight up broken most of the time, and although holding right and jumping usually will get you through each stage, it's still somehow the most frustrating and boring game I've ever played all at once.
I mean, shit, even the music sucks! How often does the music suck in a Sonic game? Well, regardless, we are going to leave this one off with the worst of the Sonic games for this console, Sonic Spinball.
That's right, we got ourselves a port! Ever notice how the box art is different between this version and the Genesis version? Robotnik's sporting his adventurous design here, and Sonic's got a normal head instead of the dumb mohawk thing on the Genesis box. Weird. Well, things get off to a really strong start, actually. I love how this opening cutscene looks, and having Sonic choose to jump into the water to enter the fortress rather than getting sniped off the tornado by Eggman like in the Genesis version is cool. We then get this awesome map screen showing Eggman's fortress, and again, it's really neat. Then the game starts. Oh boy. Yeah. This is Sonic Spinball alright, except while the Genesis version was a tough as nails and very frustrating but ultimately charming and at least okay game, this one borders on unplayability from start to finish. At least I assume from start to finish, since I'm a level with you here. I beat the first level and then I kinda gave up halfway through the second. I couldn't help it!
Sonic Spinball 8-Bit is quite possibly the worst Sonic game I have ever played, and trust me, I don't say that lightly.
Let's start with the controls. They don't work. Like, it's somehow too stiff and too precise at the same time, so getting Sonic where you need him to be is about as easy as trying to influence a real pinball in midair. And no, just being good at launching Sonic off of the flippers doesn't help because, oh my god, these physics. I'm not sure what physicsless hell dimension Eggman built his fortress in, but it is a nightmare to try and get Sonic to respond even remotely how you'd expect. Not that any of that matters because the frame rate is completely fucked. It's actually nauseating to look at, as I'm sure you've noticed, meaning that even if the game played great, it would still be the worst in this video based purely on the fact that playing it is physically uncomfortable. Strip away all that garbage and you're left with a game that is a lot like the Genesis game. Collect Chaos Emeralds to unlock a boss, then move on to the next board. The actual gimmicks from the Genesis version are mostly preserved, though the level design is simplified, which is probably a good choice given the size of the Game Gear screen, but yeah, this is really awful. In fact, I'd say it's pretty safe to call it among the absolute worst of the franchise, but honestly, other than Spinball and Sonic Blast, The games I covered today were pretty much fine, and I need to stress that the Game Gear Sonic lineup is more than worth a look, because there are some legitimately awesome games for fans of the blue blur on this thing.
But yeah, that's it for today. Let me know what you think of the games in this video down in the comments below. I love reading the comments you guys leave. I think it's very interesting to hear your thoughts on these things that I'm covering, so be sure to do that. Also, subscribe if you want to see more content. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Join the channel's Discord server, that's in the description below. That's always a lot of fun. And most importantly, watch my shit when it goes up. Please, I'm begging you. Till next time, guys, I'm LyingTuna signing off. Bye-bye.